Hi everyone. Can you please let me know in the chat to the right of your screen if you can hear me and see me and everything is sounding clear? Okay, Dan says yes. Wonderful. Good. Okay. So it looks like we've got about 22 people present right now. We had 25 registered, so there may be a few more joining us, but we will get started. Good. It sounds like everyone can hear me and see me. That's great. Wonderful. So we'll jump in to the presentation for this afternoon. So we're going to be talking about nutrition label reading, and I'll just be helping take you through what is in a nutrition label and how we can read them and sort of decode them and find out what they mean and how we can make healthy choices based on those labels. So I'll just do a quick introduction of myself. My name is Madison Walsh. I'm a health promotion specialist at CFB Halifax, working from home, of course, right now. And I have a master's of public health, and I'm also a registered dietitian. So, of course, nutrition is kind of my forte. So please feel free to ask questions along the way. I will be checking back in with the chat every now and then. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them as we go along, or we can save them till the end and go through any lingering questions that you may have. All right, so we'll move on. Can everyone see the PowerPoint okay? Should be on the bottom of your screen. Yes, good. Okay, so just for the sake of being able to see the PowerPoint a bit more clearly, I'm going to be turning my video off so you're not staring at my face the whole time and you can see the information on the screen in a larger format. So I'll turn my video off for now. I'll turn it back on at the end when we go through some questions, but just this way it's easier for you to read the screen. So we'll do that now, and you see slides now, which is good. And we'll jump right in. So just a few things before we get started. Just wanted to let you all know that this presentation is the intellectual property of the Department of the National Defense. So any reproduction of the slides is strictly forbidden. So please don't try to take pictures or videos and reproduce these slides in any way. Also, some of the topics in this webinar may be of sensitive nature. We like to just put that one in because we know a lot of you are at home, possibly with small children running around in the background. This webinar in particular is very PG. It's just about nutrition and food. So there's not really a whole lot that I would be worried about, but we do ask that you use your own discretion, as all of our presentations are intended for an adult audience. So please just be aware of that and make your own decisions based on that. We also ask that any stories that are shared from others in this presentation, whether it's through the chat or whatnot, not be shared with anyone else beyond outside of the webinar, just for privacy reasons. And also I'll point out that this video is being recorded and it will be available for viewing later on the cafconnection.ca website, along with all of our other presentations and webinars that we've been doing since this all started. So there's a whole bunch of other presentations available as well. They should either be there already or be coming soon. And this one will be joining it, the group as well once we've completed it. So you can always go back and view it later. Okay, so I want to start out first by just finding out who is watching. We like to know this information for statistics purposes. So it's obviously anonymous, but we just like to know how many of you are actual military members, how many are military family, and how many are civilians. So instead of writing that in the chat, I'm going to open up a poll, and you can just select the option that suits you. So if you look, I'm going to share it now. So if you look next to your chat box, there should be a new poll there. And yeah, that's great. It looks like many of you have figured it out. So this way we can know how many are in each category. That's wonderful. And if anyone joins in, I'll just point them towards this poll, and so we can make sure that everyone fills it out. Great. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so we'll move on now to our topic of the day, which is nutrition label reading. So what is actually in a label and how do we decipher it? We're going to go through all of these in much more detail, but I'm just going to go through each one really quickly here so that you have an idea of what topics we'll be talking about today. So the first one that I'll start off with is the one on the right bubble there, the nutrition facts table. So this one here provides you with information on the calories and the different nutrients that are in this particular food for the serving size shown. So for the amount of food that's shown in the serving size. For example, for this canned pears, the serving size is 1/2 cup. So all of the information that's on that table will apply for 1/2 cup of pears. The next thing is the ingredient list. So this one basically just tells you what ingredients are in the packaged food. And we'll talk more in detail about how the ingredient list is outlined. But essentially, it just tells you exactly which ingredients and which types of food are in the package. And thirdly are the nutrition claims. So there's 2 types of nutrition claims. We have nutrient content claims, which tell you about one specific nutrient. For example, it would say there's no sugar added. So that's a claim about a specific nutrient, whether it is or is not in the package. So there's lots of companies that use these claims to their advantage by saying there's no sugar added and giving people the perception that perhaps this is a healthier choice or something like that. Second, we have actual health claims. So these ones are a bit more specific, and they actually will link the food to your health and tell you how the diet or how this particular food that they're trying to sell to you can affect your health. And we're going to look at lots of examples of what those might look like later on this afternoon. So those are the 3 main categories of a food label, and we'll be diving into each one a little bit deeper. So the first one we'll start with is the nutrition facts table. So when we are looking at the nutrition facts table, this is really what we see, the image here on the right-hand side. So I'd like to know, I'm going to add another poll for you guys here, whether or not you already use the nutrition facts table when you're shopping for groceries. So if it's something that you look at fairly regularly when you're making decisions on what you buy, then let me know that the answer is yes. And if you really just kind of ignore them and don't look at them too much, then answer no. Okay. Cool, so it looks like most of us do, but there's certainly a small percentage that don't. So I'll hop over to the chat here, and for those that don't use nutrition facts tables, is it because you don't know how necessarily, or just because you don't care? Like, what is it? What is the reasoning behind why you don't? If you don't mind sharing in the chat, just out of curiosity, is it just something you'd like to learn more about? All right, well, we've got a quiet chat over here. So how about the people who said yes when you do use the nutrition facts table? What is it that you're looking for? Can you let me know? Like, do you specifically go on and to look for sugar or salt or fiber? Okay, we've got sugar content, calories, sugar, fat, fiber. Wow, all kinds of answers here. There we go. This is a chattier bunch on the yes side. Sugar and salt, sugar. Lots of people saying sugar and sodium. Carbohydrates for a diabetic child. That's great. Absolutely. Very important. Okay. Wonderful. Okay. Good stuff. So you all have kind of your own little things that you might look for, and hopefully by the end of today you'll have even more knowledge so you can look at even more of the details that are packed into this small little nutrition facts table. Okay, we'll move on here. So just to break down the different items that are in a nutrition facts table, and we're going to talk about each one a little bit closer. So at the top we have serving size. So that tells you, like I said earlier, the amount of food that we're measuring for all of the other nutrients that are on the label. So for example, this one, we have 1 cup of whatever food this is. And if we look at the calories, it's telling us 110 calories. That's specifically for 1 cup of the food, not necessarily for the entire product or the entire package, only for the measured serving size. And that applies to all of the nutrients that you see on that label. So that's calories there on the left. We see on the right in the small little lettering there, it says % daily value. So the % daily value kind of essentially tells you if there's a little bit or a lot of a certain nutrient in 1 serving of that food. And it can be used to compare the nutrient content of different foods. So what this really means, it's a percentage of your daily requirement. So we've taken an average person's diet and we've said, okay, the typical person needs X amount of whatever nutrient it is that we're looking at. So if a typical person needs that amount, then the percentage on the nutrition label is telling you how much of that amount is this food going to give you in that serving size amount. So if you eat a cup of this food, for example, it's giving you 22% of the daily recommended sugar intake. So that would be probably like the max amount of sugar that it's recommended that you would eat in that day. So that way you know that if you eat a cup of it, you've already consumed 22% of your daily intake, as an example, or 2% of your calcium intake, 10% of potassium, whatever it may be. Okay, so that's the percent daily value. We'll talk a little bit more about that in detail as well. And then we see the macronutrients. So we have fat, carbohydrate, and protein. Fat is broken up into saturated and trans. Does anyone know what the third type of fat is that's missing on the label? You can enter it in the chat if you know what it is. Nobody's sure? So the third type of fat is unsaturated. Yes, Ben got it. Good job. He's typed it just as I said it. So the third type of fat is unsaturated. So of course, if you want to know how much unsaturated fat is in this food, then you would just subtract this total saturated and trans, and then whatever's left in the total fat, the bolded line that says fat, would be your unsaturated fat. Then we have carbohydrates. So we have fiber and sugar. And does anyone know the third type of carbohydrate that's missing here? There's one more. So the third type, doesn't seem like anyone wants to guess this one either. The third type is starch. So again, you would just subtract the fiber and sugars from the total carbohydrate, and whatever's left would be starch. Just as a little trick there for you, if you're ever curious. Then we see cholesterol, sodium, and at the bottom, we have micronutrients. So these three that you see here at the bottom, potassium, calcium, and iron, are the required micronutrients, but any company can add more micronutrients if they want to advertise that they have a certain amount of a micronutrient in there that's not one of the required nutrients. And then at the bottom, in very small font, you can also see that it tells you that 5% or less is a little and 15% or more is a lot. So that's referring to the percent daily value. So it's just a really useful tool if you're wondering if you're getting a lot or a little of a nutrient, whether it's a nutrient that you're trying to get more of or a nutrient that you're trying to get less of. It's really handy to know sort of how much it's considered that you're getting. So for example, this one has 22% sugar. So that would be considered a fair bit of sugar in one serving of this food. Okay, so we'll move on now from that brief overview, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the changes that have been made to Canada's nutrition label. So recently, in the past few years, we've been working on a transition to the brand new nutrition facts table. And at first glance, it does look quite similar. You can see the original on the left and the new one on the right. But when we dive into some of the details, there are actually quite a few changes that have been made to try to make the label better and more user-friendly. So first of all, the serving size was made to be a little bit bigger to stand out more, and was made to be more similar on certain foods that are similar. So we're going to talk about that more in detail in a bit. The percent daily value was updated a little bit just based on the newest science and all of that, so made to be more accurate. The calorie section, we bolded and underlined calories to make them a little bit more stand out, so that you can see it really quickly. We've added a new percent daily value for total sugars. It never used to be there. We used to only have sugar in grams and a percent for carbohydrate and fiber, but not for sugar. So now that's been added, which is quite handy. we've added the milligrams for the micronutrients rather than just the percent. And we've actually changed the required micronutrients for the label. So you can see on the old label, it was vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, and iron. And on the new label, we've changed it to become potassium, calcium, and iron. So this has been updated based on minerals that are of particular public health concern. And we'll talk more about why those changes were made in a minute. And we've also added that handy little footnote that I discussed earlier, telling us that 5% is a little and 15% is a lot, just as a reminder for people when they're reading the label, so that they know exactly how much and whether or not it's a lot or a little in that product. It looks like we possibly had a few people join us. I'm not sure. It's now at 23. I think it was maybe 21 or 22 when we started. So I just want to point out for those people, if you just joined recently, to please fill out the very first poll regarding your military or civilian status. I'd love to have an accurate representation of everyone. So if you haven't filled that out, just a reminder now to please go and do that. It's under the poll section. Okay, we'll move on now. Okay, so serving size. We'll dive a little bit deeper into what this means. So like I said, it tells you how much of the food you're looking at for all of the different nutrients on the label. And it tells you the specific amount of food listed so that you can compare it to how much you actually eat, and you can compare it to the serving size on other products. So it's really important to keep in mind that just because this label, for example, says that you're getting 22% of sugar, doesn't necessarily mean that that's exactly what you're getting, because you may not actually eat 1 cup. You may perhaps eat half a cup, or you may eat 3 cups. It depends on the food, and it depends on you and your preferences and how much of a certain food you tend to eat regularly. So that's just a standard serving size that they've picked to try to make it user-friendly and able to compare with other products. But keep in mind that it may not be an accurate representation of what you are if you're consuming more or less. And then, of course, we want to use the serving size to compare to other products. So if we have 2 different products and the serving size for both, okay, it looks like I just lost Wi-Fi there for a second. I had a little notification on my computer. Can everyone still hear me now? Yes, okay. Did I disappear there for a second? Okay, cool. Glad I'm back. All right, wonderful. So it's really handy to be able to compare the serving size for 2 different products, especially if they're the same serving size. So if you're comparing 2 different products and you're trying to figure out which one is a better choice, it's a great idea to look first at the serving size to make sure that they're the same. And if they're not, you may have to do some math in your head to adjust and figure out in order to compare them. For example, if one serving size is 1 cup and another is half a cup, you would have to double all of the amounts for the one that has half a cup to be able to have them comparable, so that you make sure that you're making an informed decision. All right. So here's just a little bit more about the changes that we've made in regards to serving size to make it more user-friendly so that we can more easily compare products. So the first one is that the new guidelines have made serving sizes now based on regular reference amounts. So for example, in this case, the yogurt, the similar products, similar yogurt types have the same measured amount for its serving size. So for example, it's hard to see here, they're a little bit blurry because I blew them up, but in the original, you can see that the serving size is not the same. It was a 1/3 cup in yogurt A and half a cup in yogurt B. But in the new standards, we've made sure that comparable products have the same measured amount. So they're always going to have the same serving size. For example, in this case, it's 3/4 of a cup in both yogurt A and B. And that just makes it so much easier. You're not having to stand in the grocery store and do mental math. In this case, you're just able to see which one has more sugar or more fat or whatever it is that you're looking at very easily and very quickly. So that's been standardized in the new system, which is fantastic. Here we have crackers. So of course, with something like yogurt, it's much easier to measure like a measured amount, like a cup or half a cup. But with crackers, because crackers, for example, are all different sizes and shapes, that's not really the best way to measure by cups. So instead, it's often measured by weight. So we have, for these types of products, made the weights the same. So rather than having one be, let's see what it says here, it looks like 28 grams and 14 grams, they're now both 19 grams, I believe, or per, the same, basically the same weight amount, so that, you may be eating more crackers of cracker B because they're smaller, but cracker A is bigger. So by weight, you're actually eating the same amount. So that's how we make sure that they're comparable in things that are different sizes and shapes. And lastly, for foods that are eaten in what they call typical amounts, or the amounts typically eaten, we've standardized it per that amount. So for example, a really great version of this would be bread slices. So the typical amount that someone would eat is not one slice, it's actually two, because for the most part, people would have 2 pieces of toast with their breakfast or 2 pieces of bread to make a sandwich or something like that. So instead of allowing companies to say per one slice, we've standardized it so that everyone has to say 2 slices with bread example, because that's the amount that's typically eaten for the average person. So that way it's more honest, because people are actually, when they're reading the label, they're seeing the amount of each nutrient that they would be getting from the amount that they would actually be eating, and not from half that amount if they were to say 1 slice. It also does make it a lot easier to compare products when, again, you're not having to do mental math and doubling all of the nutrients on the label that has 1 in order to compare it to the label that has 2 slices. So that's been a really handy change. I will point out also that these changes are in the transition stage, so you won't see it everywhere. Companies have a certain amount of time to kind of transition into these changes and the new labels. So because of that, there's a little bit of overlap, and you may end up seeing some products that still have the old label and some products that have already transitioned to the new label. So it's going to take some time before all of our products have the new label. But it has been going on for some time now, so we're well on our way to getting to that point. And once we are, everything is going to be a lot easier when we're comparing products and reading nutrition labels. Okay, let's dive in a little bit more as well to the percent daily value. So as I said before, 5% daily value is considered a little bit of that nutrient, and 15% or more is considered a lot of that nutrient. And this applies to all of the nutrients that you see on the label. This here on the right-hand side is actually an old label, as you can see, because it has the vitamin A and C instead of potassium, and all of the other differences haven't been changed. But because we still see both in our grocery stores, I've tried to incorporate both types of labels throughout this presentation. So when we're looking here at the percent daily value, this is what tells you what percent of the recommended amount you are getting of that nutrient. I mentioned that it's based on an average diet. That average diet is 2,000 calorie diet. So that's a fairly average amount of food. So that would be you're eating 2,000 calories in one day. So most people eat somewhere around that. Smaller people may eat a little bit less. If you exercise a lot or you're a larger, taller, broader person, you may eat a little bit more. Or if you're an elite athlete, then you may eat quite a bit more. But for the average Canadian, 2,000 is a pretty good guess. So it is important to know kind of yourself. And if you do know that you eat, a little bit less than 2,000, then make sure that you're also aware that the percent daily values will be a little bit high than what you're actually eating. So you may have to consider that those numbers would be a little bit lower, or vice versa if you eat more than 2,000. But in general, they're a pretty good estimate of how much of each nutrient you would be getting compared to what you need in a day. So like I said, let's look at fat. This particular cookie, so for 2 cookies, we're getting 11% of our daily fat. So that means that we have quite a bit of more room to consume fat throughout the rest of the day. It's under the 15%, so it's not considered a lot, but it's also not under the 5%, so it's not considered a little. So it's sort of somewhere in between, which is pretty okay place to be when we're talking about fat. All right, so that is basically the rundown on percent daily value. Hopefully that makes sense. It's probably the hardest part to explain about the nutrition label, but once you get used to it, it really is a very helpful tool, because if you're trying to get more of a particular nutrient, for example, fiber, if you're really concentrating on wanting to get lots of fiber, then all you have to do is look at that percent daily value, and you'll know if you're reaching your total, because you can just add it up for all of the different types of foods that you've eaten throughout the day or that you typically eat. And the same goes for if you're trying to minimize a certain nutrient, like for example, some of us may be minimizing our sodium intake if we're worried about our blood pressure. So for those ones, you can look and see, well, this one here only has 3% of our total sodium recommended intake, so that does qualify as being a little, and so this might be a great product for you to grab. Whereas if you're looking at the milligram amount, that can be really confusing because not everyone necessarily knows exactly how much sodium in milligrams they should be eating throughout a day. So 80 milligrams could really mean not a whole lot to many people. But when we put it in the percentage and we know that anything under 5% is only a little, then when we see 3%, we know that we're okay to pick this product. So if you have any questions about that, do let me know, but hopefully that clarifies what the percent daily value does and how it can be useful. Okay, so here we go. This is just kind of a little example. So if we're looking at the percent daily value, the serving size for both of these burgers, a sirloin burger and a chicken burger, is the same. So we know we can compare them right off the bat. So if we go to the chat so that you guys can participate a little bit, which one has less total fat by looking at the percent daily value? Let's see if you can find it. Either the chicken or the sirloin. Chicken, yes, exactly. So quite a bit less total fat actually. So the chicken burger has 14%. The sirloin burger has 42%. So if fat is something that you're looking out for and trying to minimize, you may choose the chicken burger over the sirloin burger. All right, what about if we look at more specifically, if we're worried about saturated and trans fat, the same thing, right? The sirloin burger has quite a bit more of the percentage of saturated and trans fat that you're supposed to try to stay under every day. So if you're looking at fats, the chicken burger is definitely a better choice in that respect. Let's look at sodium too. We have 14% sodium on the sirloin and 33% on the chicken burger. So if you're not worried about fat, but perhaps you're worried about your blood pressure and you're looking for sodium, in that case, maybe you want to try the sirloin burger because it has a fair bit lower sodium content than the chicken burger. And one more, we'll look at iron, because that of course is a popular one when we're talking about red meat, like the sirloin burger. You will see that you're getting quite a bit more iron from that sirloin burger than the chicken burger. We have 30% of our daily value and only 2% in the chicken burger. So that's just kind of a fun example to go through to show you how you would actually use the percent daily value, depending on what it is you're worried about or you're looking for, whether it's more or less of a certain nutrient. You can easily compare the nutrition facts table as long as the serving size is the same amount. All right. So when we're looking at the specific nutrients on the nutrition facts table, there's some that most people would like to get more of, and some that it's recommended that you focus on getting less of. So when we look at what we want more of, those include fiber, potassium, calcium, and iron. And the ones that we want perhaps a little bit less of are saturated and trans fat, as well as sodium. So if you're trying to follow a healthy, balanced diet, then this is kind of the general rules that you can follow. And these would be the different items that you would be recommended to focus on by following a general healthy diet. If you're looking at these items on the nutrition facts table and nothing else, then that's great. These are kind of the more important ones you want more of or less of. So those are where we should kind of put our focus. So we'll start with fiber. So we want more fiber. So most people don't eat enough fiber, and we want to try to increase the fiber intake of Canadians as a whole. So in total, we actually need at least 25 to 38 grams of fiber per day. So as a general rule, it's advised that we choose products that have 4 grams or more of fiber per serving. And that will help us to reach our 25 to 38 gram per day recommendation. It will add up over the day, and eventually, hopefully, you can get there throughout the day. But it can be difficult to get that much fiber. But it is also important to keep in mind that you're getting fiber probably from a lot of foods that aren't packaged, and therefore those don't have nutrition facts table. So for example, in this photo, all of these foods have fiber to some extent. And for example, the fruit there, right? You've got lots of citrus fruit, grapes, banana, apple. Those would all provide you with certain amounts of fiber. And those you're not going to see with a nutrition label. So you may not be including those if you're trying to count up the amount of fiber that you're getting. So keep that in mind, that you may be getting more than you think you are, because there's no label on those types of foods. So that's really great that we can get fiber from these natural foods. Oh, I just saw that there's a question here from Marie France. What about less sugar? What were you asking for that one? Was that for a slide back? I want to make sure I answer your question. Marie? A slide back. Okay, let's see if we can figure out. Okay, right, less sugar. Okay, perfect. I'm actually just about to get there. So hold on and let me know if I answer your question in literally 1 second. So that's great. And then I see Nick has a question here about fiber before we move on to sugar. Does fiber affect sleep? Not particularly. The only way that I could think of that it would affect sleep is in terms of bowel movements, perhaps. So, you know, if you're eating too much fiber or not enough fiber, it can have certain various effects in either direction with bowel movements, so constipation or diarrhea, depending. So maybe that can affect your sleep a little bit. But otherwise, no, I don't think that you'd really have to worry about fiber affecting your sleep. I'm not sure if you've heard that somewhere or where that question maybe originated from, but let me know if maybe there's something that you've heard that disagrees with that. But that's my understanding, that it wouldn't really have any significant effect on your sleep. And in fact, fiber is actually really, really great for us. It has a lot of fantastic health benefits in terms of our bowel movements, and our heart health. Is really important for so many different processes in our body. So it really does help to keep us healthy in so many ways. So it is a great idea to try to strive for the 25 to 38 grams per day if possible. So now we're going to talk about sugar. So aside from fiber, the other 2 types of carbohydrates, and I've added them in here because like Marie France, you pointed out that sugar and starch were not on this slide here in terms of trying to get less sugar, which is really great that you pointed that out, because I knew that people would probably question that, which is why I put a little section here about our other carbohydrates. So for sugar, the reason why I haven't included it in the get less section is because many foods actually have natural sugar. So a lot of the time it will look like that food has a fair bit of sugar on the label, but it may not have any added sugar at all. That sugar may all be natural sugar. And for the most part, foods that have natural sugar are not foods that you should necessarily be avoiding. Of course, you know, if someone's a diabetic, then that may be a whole nother conversation. And in this presentation, we're not talking about individuals specifically with certain health differences in terms of diabetes or other health issues like that. But for the general population, if you don't have diabetes, then you wouldn't want to exclude foods that have natural sugar. So that's the reason I haven't included it. However, that being said, we do want to try to get less of the added sugar. So that's really where the difference comes in. So the World Health Organization has put out a statement that less than 10% of our total calories should come from added sugar. So that's the key word there, is the added sugar, because the natural sugar is really something that you shouldn't be worrying about. The reason behind that is that typically foods with natural sugar also contain a fair bit of fiber. And when fiber comes with sugar, it plays a really good role in making sure that our blood sugars don't spike quite so much as they do with added sugar or pure sugar. So because of that, it's not typically something that we worry about. That being said, there are certain products that have natural sugar and have the fiber removed. A really great example of that is natural 100% fruit juice. So even though fruit juice, when it's 100% fruit, it doesn't have added sugar, it does still have high amounts of sugar. And in the processing, since you're not eating the whole fruit, it will have high amounts of sugar and not very much fiber. So there are, of course, always certain cases where there's an exception to the rule. But the reason behind why we haven't included it in the list of ones that you should worry about eating less is because of the fact that we don't want to exclude foods that are really great for you, that have healthy natural sugars. However, like I said, we still do want to try to get less of those added sugars. So if you see a product that has added sugar, then definitely that may be something you want to get less of. And we'll talk about how to know when we look into the ingredients list. We'll be able to tell where the added sugars are in the ingredients, okay? And then one other point for sugar is the other recommendation, and we're going to talk about this a little bit when we do some comparisons with cereals, but the other recommendation that you can use if you are worried about added sugar is to try to find products that have 5 grams or less sugar for things like cereals, snacks, and grains. That doesn't apply to all products, again, because of all the different types of products that have all kinds of different types of sugars. But for those 3 types of products, it is recommended that you strive for 5 grams or less whenever possible, okay? So hopefully that helps answer your question about sugar. And then just to quickly touch on starch, I mentioned earlier, starch is not on the label, but if you are interested in finding out how much starch is in a product, you can find that out pretty easily by just doing a little bit of mental math and subtracting the fiber and sugar amounts from the total carbohydrates amounts. And then that gives you how much of the total carbohydrate is starch. So if you are curious about that, that's the way you would do it. Okay, moving on. Micronutrients. So our micronutrients are also something that we want to get more of. And these currently are potassium, calcium, and iron. Like I said, those are the 3 mandatory required nutrients to go on the nutrition label because they are of particular public health concern. So calcium and iron were always on the label. Those ones were in the old label and they continue to be in the new label because they continue to be of public health concern. And when we say public health concern, essentially I'm just saying these are nutrients that we've found most Canadians are not getting enough of, and they have really great benefits. So we want to make sure that everyone gets enough of them. For example, calcium is really important for our bone health. Iron, for example, many women in particular are low in iron as a result of multiple factors, one of which is the menstrual cycle. So it is important that we get enough iron in our diet as well. So those 2 have always been there and they remain there. But we've added potassium because we've found that it's important for maintaining healthy blood pressure, and most Canadians are not getting enough of it. So if we want to try to reduce the rates of hypertension or high blood pressure in our Canadian society, then it's important that everyone focuses on potassium, and that's the reason that we've added potassium to the new label. And then we've also removed vitamin A and C, simply because most Canadians do get enough of these nutrients. In fact, most of us probably get more than we even need. that's fine for the most part. There's no real harm in getting lots and lots of these micronutrients through food, but there's really no need to have it on the label because it's not a nutrient of concern at this time. And then to add to that, those 3 nutrients are the only ones that are required to be on the label, but any company can add whatever other micronutrients they would like to their label. So if they are really proud of the fact that they're high in like vitamin K, for example, then they can put that on their nutrient label if they want to advertise that fact. Or if they're low in something and they want to advertise it, or whatever it may be. So they can add those on their own, but they still have to have those 3 no matter what. Those are required. And Ben, I see you say beans and legumes are high in potassium. Absolutely, that's a great example. So everyone eat their legumes as much as possible. That's a really great idea. Perfect. Okay. Next, we want to, in general, have less fat. However, I'll preface this by saying my idea of this is really to focus on saturated and trans and not really worry too much about the total fat, in particular the unsaturated fat, because unsaturated fat, as many of you probably know, is considered the healthy type of fat. So I would recommend focusing more so on saturated and trans. So our daily recommendations are 65 grams or less total fat. That's important, but more important than that is the saturated and trans, and that one says that 20 grams a day or less we should focus on getting less than that of saturated and trans fat. So if you're looking at the labels, make sure that you're finding foods that have lower levels of saturated and trans fat as your priority. So when you're looking at a specific label, that would mean looking perhaps at 3 grams or less of fat. That's your overall fat. More importantly, 2 grams or less of saturated and trans fat together. And then that can also translate into the daily value, which could be 8% or less per serving of total fat. But really the main one that I want to drive home is saturated and trans fat. So focus on remembering 2 grams or less if you're looking at the label, and your daily amount should be 20 grams or less. Okay, so those little grams can certainly add up. So try to keep in mind that 20 grams or less throughout the day. And if you're just looking at one particular label, then following the rule of 2 grams or less of those 2 types of fats is the way to go. All right. Less sodium. Okay, so of course, everyone knows that we, as a society, eat too much sodium, and we should try to reduce our sodium intake. Absolutely, this is true. So the daily recommendation by Health Canada is 2,300 milligrams per day or less. However, the average Canadian actually consumes 3,400 milligrams a day on average. So that's a lot more sodium than what the daily recommendation is. Unfortunately, it's really hard to actually achieve the 2,300 milligrams a day or less because so many foods have added salt. So it is a challenge, but it absolutely, you can certainly work to reduce it over time. So if you're looking for products that are low sodium, you would be looking for products that have 200 milligrams or less per serving, or if you translate that to a daily value, then it would be 8% or less per serving. That would be considered low sodium. So you'll notice that's not 5% or less, because the 5% or less would mean a little, but it's not necessarily falling under that category. But to be lower in sodium, you ideally 8% or less is acceptable. It doesn't always have to be 5% or less, just because it's really hard to find products that have 5% or less. And I see Stephen has said that a microwavable noodle bowl has 70% sodium. And yeah, that's a really great example. I believe it. I honestly haven't probably looked at a microwavable noodle bowl nutrition fact table in a long time, but I believe you, absolutely. There are a lot of packaged foods that have crazy high sodium levels. So it's really important to limit that whenever possible. Is there a chart available that contains all recommended daily amounts for these items? Yeah, so is if you Google, like, I think it's Health Canada that that puts them out, and I can try to find it. Remind me at the end, and I'll see if I can find it. If you hang on the line a little bit at the end, and I can try to put the link in the chat. Okay, so maybe if you can remind me at the end, that would be great. I just don't want to take too much time for everybody else right now. So that would be great. Okay, perfect. All right, we'll move on. Oops, here we go. Sodium. So that's it for sodium. Basically, try to get low sodium whenever possible so that we can achieve those daily recommendations. Okay, so up next, we're going to look at the ingredient list. So basically, it's pretty straightforward and easy. The ingredient lists are listed in descending order by weight. So that means that the first ingredient on the list is the ingredient that there's the most of in that food by weight. And then as you go down the ingredient list, the weight of each ingredient or food gets lower and lower. It's mandatory that all packaged foods have an ingredient list. And this is a really good tool for people with allergies or intolerances in particular, because that way they can look specifically at whether or not a product has a specific ingredient that they're either trying to avoid, or perhaps maybe they're trying to get, whatever it is. So it makes it really easy to know exactly what's in each type of food. Okay. So here we go. This is just a bit of an overview of the changes that have been made to the ingredient list. We looked at the changes that were made to the new label, the nutrition facts table, and there have also been changes made to this ingredient list. So it's been made easier to read. They've added uppercase and lowercase for all of the different words. They've separated them by bullet points. They've put it all on a white or neutral background with black font. They've made a minimum type height requirement, so it has to be a certain size so people can actually read it rather than squinching it in on a tiny little box. The ingredients is in bold, and the bullets or commas are there to separate each ingredient. But the most important thing that I want to point out, and I think I have a slide on it here, is the sugars. So I mentioned that we'd talk a little bit more about how to tell if there's added sugars. This is really the way to tell. So if there's added sugars, it's going to say so. Now it's going to just say sugars, and then in brackets, it's going to say all of the different types of sugars that that product has. In the past, you can see on the left, the different sugars were actually dispersed within the ingredient list. And that was really tricky because not everyone necessarily knows that, for example, fancy molasses is a type of sugar. So they were therefore able to make it look like sugar, because you actually see brown sugar and actual sugar are quite a bit lower down on the ingredient list, whereas fancy molasses is the second ingredient. So the way that they were doing it previously, they were able to actually say that flour is the highest weight ingredient in their product. But with a new method, we can now see that that sugar is actually the highest weight ingredient, because they've had to combine them all together. So even though they use 3 different types of sugar, they're all still sugar, and they have to be combined together by weight. So then when you combine 3 different types of sugar together, all of a sudden they now outweigh the flour, and they're going to be the first on the list. So this is a really great new rule, because now it forces companies to take a look at their sugars and hopefully try to decrease the sugar, because really nobody wants to have added sugar as the first ingredient on their list, because for the most part, a lot of people do try to avoid added sugar. So that's really important. And any of these sugars that are in the list, they are added sugar, because if there's a natural sugar, it would just say the food that has that natural sugar. For example, if the product has strawberries in it, those strawberries do have added sugar, but it would just say strawberries because that's the ingredient. So it's not going to say natural strawberry sugar. It's just going to say strawberries. So if there's any type of sugar in those parentheses after the word sugar, those are all added sugar, okay? So hopefully that clarifies that with regards to sugar and the new ingredient list. Okay, the third type of nutrition label that we're looking at is the nutrition claims, like I mentioned at the beginning. So there's 2 types of nutrition claims, as I said. The first one that we're going to talk about is nutrient content claims. So a nutrient content claim is basically just a statement about the amount of a nutrient in a food. And these statements or claims are really handy in helping you to either consume more or less of a nutrient. So essentially, they're just describing the amount of a certain nutrient in a food. Typically, they're saying whether or not they've got lots of a nutrient or if they've got really not a lot of the nutrients. So there's like no added sugar, for example. Or they may say high in fiber. So, you know, those are two examples of different ends of the extreme. So either high or low in a certain nutrient, depending on how they want to advertise their product. So we'll just go through some of the typical common nutrient content claims and what they mean and how they can be translated. So the first one is free. So for example, sugar-free or free of added whatever, right? Whatever ingredient is that they're saying it's free of, that means that the ingredient is added in such a small amount that health experts would consider it nutritionally insignificant, and it basically has absolutely no effect on your health in that small amount, or perhaps it can also be completely non-existent. So it's really just not there at all, or it's so small that it doesn't matter. Low means a very small amount, and unfortunately there's no definition necessarily with a very small amount because it depends on the type of food, and there's a different definition for low depending on the type of food, and there's lots of them. So basically it's just important to know that that it's a small amount and really not something to worry about if it says low. Some other words that can be used instead of low are little or few, as an example. And for free, sometimes they say zero or without. Then we can see reduced or less or fewer. Any of those words would qualify in the same category. For those ones, it means that at least 25% less of a nutrient compared with a similar product. So they would be comparing it to perhaps their original. So like if, let's say, a brand of chips, perhaps they have a reduced sodium version. That means that it has 25% less sodium than in their original version. That's what that means. Then we have light, which means it's only allowed on foods that are either reduced in fat or reduced in energy by 25%. So it's just another way of saying reduced in fat or reduced in calories, but they've made this new word to say light. So like, for example, if you see light mayonnaise, then it means that it's reduced in fat by 25% than the original mayonnaise or Miracle Whip or whatever. So that's kind of a common way that you would see the word light. And then at the bottom there, we have no added. So no added sugar is a really common example, which would mean that none of the nutrient was added to the sugar. So they like to advertise that if they haven't added any sugar as a good example. So those are kind of the content claims that show that there's very little, if not none, of a certain nutrient. And now we'll look at the ones that show that they've got lots of a nutrient. So on the other side of things, these ones are advertising that they're high in a certain nutrient. So if it says higher in or high or more, then it means that it has at least 25% more of a nutrient compared with a similar product. So same thing like I talked about with the chips, but on the other side of it, if let's say they've added more fiber to their crackers, right? So they have their original crackers and then they have a higher fiber cracker in the same brand, then they could say higher in fiber, and that would mean that it has 25% more fiber than the original cracker. We also see a good source of, and this means at least 25% of the recommended intake, at least 15% of the recommended intake if it's a good source. So that ties back into the fact that 15% or more on a nutrition label is considered a lot. So if you're getting a lot of it, then it is a good source of it. So they are able to say good source of fiber or whatever if they have more than 15% or at least 15%. And lastly, we have excellent source of as opposed to good source of, and this means that it provides a very large amount of the nutrient. And again, this is not easily defined. It would depend more so on the ingredient in this case, but if it says excellent source, then you can be pretty certain that you're getting lots of that nutrient. And if that's something that you're trying to do, then it might be a good choice. Okay, so those are our various nutrient content claims. Here are some examples of what those might look like. So on the left, we have our Quaker oatmeal, and right on the box it says high fiber. So that one, they're advertising that they're high in fiber. In the middle, we have Heinz beans that have no added sugar. You can see right there. And in the mayonnaise, Hellmann's mayonnaise dressing, you can see, if you look closely, it says cholesterol free. So they're advertising that there is no cholesterol in this particular mayonnaise. So those are just a few examples of what that might look like. They sometimes can be very obvious, or sometimes, like the cholesterol one, it's a bit harder to see. They're a little bit more hidden, but usually they try to make them as obvious as they can, especially if it's something good that they're trying to advertise and get you to buy their product. Okay, second type of claim that we're looking at, nutrition claims, is a health claim. So a health claim is basically any representation in labeling or advertising that states, suggests, or implies that a relationship exists between the consumption of a food or an ingredient in the food and a person's health. So all that to say, they're tying that particular food to your health in some way and saying that if you eat this food, it will have a good benefit on your health in whatever way it is that they're advertising. So let's look at some examples here. We have Activia yogurt, and this one has a health claim that says helps regulate your digestive system. So it's actually making a health claim saying that if you eat this yogurt, it may have a positive effect in regulating your health or your digestive system. So that's a very great example of a health claim. Another really popular, famous health claim that's always on their boxes, all of their different types of boxes, is Cheerios, because they really love to advertise that they use oats, and oat fiber helps to lower cholesterol. So they are really big on advertising that. And so they always have it on their box as a health claim, telling you that if you eat Cheerios, it could help to lower cholesterol. It is important to note that these claims seem very wide sweeping and very affirmative, saying, you know, oat fiber helps lower cholesterol. And that's true, those are true statements, but keep in mind that each individual is different. So just because you eat a bowl of Cheerios every now and then doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to lower your cholesterol. There's a lot more factors that go into that, but they still like to use it to their advantage to try to get you to buy their product. So sometimes it's important to be a little bit cautious and not just assume that what they're saying is 100% true and not necessarily taking it at face value. But it can certainly help to know that these certain products could potentially have positive effects on your health. Okay, so we're almost at the end here. We're going to compare a few products fairly quickly just to give you some practice. So first of all, we have two different yogurts, yogurt A and yogurt B. I'd like to know, using your brand new nutrient fact reading skills, which yogurt you feel that you would choose and why. So what you would look for and why you feel that one yogurt is better than the other. So I do have a poll, so I can add that there and you can just vote. And if you have more to say about it, you can add that to the chat about why you might make that choice. But there's a poll there with A and B. Love to see what you think. Okay, I've got most people saying A, a couple B, and someone just said yogurt A in the chat. Okay, so generally I would agree with those of you that said yogurt A. The reasons for me is that it has, basically it's really the fat that I'm looking at. There's lots of other things you can certainly look at, but the fat, you can see there's less than 8% daily value. 2 grams saturated and trans, and 3 grams total. So it falls really quite perfectly in those fat recommendations that I talked about in the fat section. Whereas yogurt B has a fair bit more fat in it. So you can see it's higher than the 8%, has more than the 2 grams of saturated and trans, and more than the 3 grams of total. It has 10 grams total. So that is a consideration with yogurt. There are, of course, other things that you can look at. So some of you may have looked at the sodium. So if you're looking at the sodium only, then yogurt B may be a better choice for you if that's what you're concerned about. So for those of you that said B, maybe that's what you are looking for, in which case that's totally fine. Another point is that yogurt B has less sugar. So if you're more concerned about your sugar intake, you may have chosen yogurt B. Again, absolutely, that's a fair choice. So it's very much individualized. There's no right or wrong answer when it comes to these. It's really just about what works best for you and your diet and your health. We'll do another one here. So this one we have 2 different peanut butters. So I'll put up another poll and see which one you feel that you would choose and why. Okay. Looks like most people are saying the peanuts only, all natural. A couple people said smooth. All right, so when we break this one down, overall, I'd say the all natural peanut butter is generally a bit of a better choice. We can look at it, it has 1 gram less fat and 0.5 grams less saturated fat, so it's slightly low in fat, although really not too significant. We see that it has 60 milligrams less sodium, so that's pretty good. And it does have slightly more protein, 1 gram more protein, but they have the same calories, they have the same fiber, and they have the same sugar. So it does come down to personal preference, of course. Some people may just prefer the smooth. I personally love the all natural. I just find it tastes more peanutty. So personal preference is really important here. Really, none of those factors are important enough, you know, necessarily to merit choosing one or the other. They're both still, you know, great items. So it really just depends on your preference. But of course, anything that's more natural, people tend to think is automatically going to be significantly better, but that's not necessarily the case. So I like to talk about that one here. And then here we have 2 different breads. So I just like to do this one just to show you what the different nutrients look like. I think everyone knows that the recommendation is to eat whole grain products rather than white. So we'll just kind of go through this one as a group. So really the whole wheat one is, of course, the recommended choice in this case. It does have 1 gram less fat. It has 3 grams more fiber and 1 gram more protein. The fiber is really the main reason for me why I would recommend whole grain, anything whole wheat, whole grain over white. But you will see that it actually has more sodium. So if sodium is something that you are looking out for your blood pressure, then maybe you want to take that into consideration. So again, not necessarily one right answer, but I find that is interesting. Okay, I had planned for you guys to go to your cupboard and find 2 boxes of cereal and kind of compare them yourself, 1 or 2 boxes. If you want to stick around and do this activity with me, please do. I recognize we've now been 1 hour and 2 minutes, so if you have other places to be, I won't be offended. Just be sure that you do go and answer that poll about your military status before you leave. If you haven't already, that one I really would appreciate. But for those of you who want to stick around, then we're going to do this final activity and then we'll be done. So if you are at home, I would love if you can take a few seconds to get up and just grab 1 or 2 boxes of cereal from your cupboard, and then we're going to kind of take a look at them and see how they rank in terms of the recommended amounts of fiber and sugar. So I'll give you a few minutes. Maybe a few of you can let me know when you're back. If you have cereal, and you can bring them to your desk or wherever it is you are. If you don't have cereal in your cupboard, that's fine. You can still participate just by listening and seeing what everybody else has. So don't worry about that if you don't have it, or you can grab something else if you're curious. But these particular pieces of information apply mainly to cereal, so they don't really apply to other products, which is why I've told you to go grab a cereal. So I'll give you another few seconds if you have some. And once you are back, we will take a look at the details of your cereal box. It's kind of fun. Okay, has anyone been able to grab a cereal? It looks like one person said they were done. Yep, okay, cool. We've got a couple of you taking part. That's good. So, you would love a standard serving size. Absolutely. So sometimes you may not have a standard serving size if you're having the old nutrition labels. So that can be tricky. So you may need to do some mental math. But if you do have some cereals and you'd like to compare, take a look at the fiber and the sugar and see whether your cereal gets a gold medal, a silver medal, or a bronze medal. So if it has greater than or equal to 4 grams of fiber and less than or equal to 5 grams of sugar, that means your cereal gets a gold medal. If it has greater than or equal to 3 grams of fiber and less than or equal to 8 grams of sugar, so it's kind of in between, then a silver medal. And if it has less than 3 grams of fiber and more than or equal to 8 grams of sugar, then that would be a bronze medal. So take some time. See, looks like, Rochelle, you have a silver medal cereal. Do you mind telling me what kind of cereal you have? Multigrain Cheerios. All right. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I actually was really surprised when I went to Costco a couple months ago, before all this crazy COVID stuff happened, of course, and I bought multigrain Cheerios and was really shocked when I took it home and compared it to my regular Cheerios that they actually have more sugar than regular Cheerios, which I guess makes sense because I need to flavor them to make them taste good. But it was quite shocking to me. Yeah. Okay, so someone else has FIBRE sugar, 0 sugar. Oh, 0 sugar. Gotcha. Bronze for one, silver for the other. Gold medal for the steel cut oats. Yes, absolutely. Steel cut oats are the way to go for sure. Yummy. That's great. And you can add all kinds of fruits and yummy stuff to that. Gold medal for all brand buds. Yes, that's a really great one. I see that one a lot. And that's a really, really good one, especially for fiber. Great. Salad and yogurt. Good call. Absolutely. Silver and bronze for Vector. Okay. So how is it silver / bronze? It's got some both. Okay. Anyone else have anything they want to share? Looks like people. Oh, okay. Stoked oats. Good. 3 grams fiber over 8 grams sugar. Ah, okay. Gotcha. Puffed wheat. How did the puffed wheat do, Rick? Oh, it was 1 gram of fiber and 0 sugar, you said, right? Yeah, okay. All right. Well, that's kind of in between, eh? 0 sugar, that's good. Awesome. Okay. Well, hopefully you had fun with that and were able to see, what's in your own pantry. It kind of is interesting to evaluate your own products. Maybe you've never really looked at your own products before. You just kind of buy the ones that you like or that you're used to. Oh, we've got mini wheats, great for fiber. Sugar is 11. Yeah, that's a lot of sugar in that for sure. 5 grams, 1 sugar. Comparing Life cereal and Golden grams. Okay, cool. Fiber is 6. Yeah, that's really good. Wow, I didn't know mini wheats had that much fiber. That's interesting. Very nice. I do love mini wheats. So of course, the color medal that your cereal gets is not the be-all end-all. This is just a fun little activity. Just because something has a bronze medal doesn't mean that you should never eat it. It's just maybe that the gold and silver ones are a little bit better in certain ways, but having something that tastes good and that you enjoy is obviously also really important. So keeping that in mind. What else have we got here? Both same sugar, higher in golden grams. Okay. Silver for Shreddies. Interesting. Okay. I haven't had Shreddies in a long time. 4 gram fiber, 7 grams sugar, Quaker oatmeal square. Oh, cool. Okay. That sounds yummy. All right. I'm going to turn my video back on so you guys don't forget what I looked like. It's always fun to see what everyone has in their cupboard and at least have you participate a little bit. I know this whole virtual presentation thing is taking some getting used to for all of us, but hopefully it was at least a little bit engaging, even though I couldn't be there in person to present to everyone. So I don't want to keep you for too much longer. I'm just going to show you this last slide here. This is just a few resources that they ask us to provide you at the end of all of our presentations, with just some numbers and websites that you all have access to if you're in need of help or advice or anything. Lots of great information and services are kind of at your beck and call with these numbers. So please do take advantage of them. If you want to take a photo of this slide, you are welcome to do so, just so that you have those numbers and websites available to you once I flip off this slide. So feel free to do that now if you're looking to have those numbers available to you. I hope that you enjoyed this presentation. That's the end. So if any of you have a few other questions, lingering questions, I'll stay on the line for a few seconds. I remember I did have one question that I had to go back and find a link. I forget exactly what it was about, but I'll find that question and see who that was for. And okay, it was Rochelle. Is there a chart available that contains all the recommended daily amounts for these items? Okay, I will see if I can find that. Rochelle, if you just want to stick on the line for a second. Anyone else who's interested in seeing it, please also, you can stick around as well. I'm just going to flip off my camera and go and see if I can find that for you, and I will be back. Okay, I have found them. So they are on the Government of Canada, kind of Health Canada website. I will say they're not particularly easy to understand. So hopefully they'll make somewhat sense to you. I'll send you the links here. That one is the macronutrients, so protein, fat, and fiber. This one is the elements. And this one here, the third one, is vitamins. So you can save those links if you are interested. Those are the Health Canada dietary reference intakes. So they basically tell you the recommended intakes for all of the different nutrients, including all kinds of different ones. All of the ones that we talked to today should be in there somewhere. So if you want to save those, I think they will disappear once I end this session. So Rochelle, let me know once you've had a chance to save them. Anyone else, if you're interested, I see there's 6 people left on the line, so please do open those up and keep them for yourself. I'm happy to give you that resource. I just don't want to end the session before you've had a chance to save those information. Okay, great. Yeah, good. I'm glad glad I was able to help with that. Hopefully you're able to decipher them well enough. They are a bit overwhelming, but if you take your time to try to understand them, they do make a little bit of sense. So good luck.